Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. This is my year-end review for the heavyweight division 2019. The look back, and it'll be a little bit different to past years where we've done longer 30 to 50 minute videos. I'll make this one more a rapid fire, go through a few categories, basically sort of awards essentially. So we'll crack into it. So buckle in. Let's go. Starting with knockout of the year. And this one for me is quite an easy one. I'm going for Deontay Wilder over Dominic Breazeale. This was a fight in which Wilder had to do, because it was his mandatory challenger, always expected to win. Dominic Breazeale talked it up, but ultimately he proved that he didn't have any defense, and Deontay Wilder found his way through early on in the fight. Dropped him like a sack of potatoes off a cliff, and he went down hard, and I'm still pretty confident that Dominic Breazeale is looking for his soul, which departed his body at the moment of impact. That really was a heavy knockdown, highlight reel knockdown, and certainly I think the best one in the heavyweight division in 2019. It was good stuff by Deontay Wilder. So we'll get to the next category, and actually a few of these start to meld into the same sort of fight and fighter, and you'll probably see where this is going. Upset of the year. Andy Ruiz Jr. upsetting unified heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua June 1st in New York. A lot of people knew Andy Ruiz Jr. was a good fighter, and if you followed his career from, the days when he had a title shot against Joseph Parker in 2016, he is a quality operator, solid fighter, but I guess people were overlooking him, including myself. I expected that Joshua would win, but I thought Andy Ruiz Jr. would put up a good effort, and it was more than that. He ends up catching Anthony Joshua, and he stops him in the 7th round of that fight. So he caught him in the 3rd round, dropped him twice there, ultimately dropped him 4 times in the fight, and that was the upset of the year. Andy Ruiz Jr., I think it was a 14-1 underdog, comes through, defeats Anthony Joshua, changes his life, gets 3 major heavyweight belts, and he becomes the heavyweight champion of the world, the first fighter of Mexican heritage to have a piece of the heavyweight title. So that was a massive event and a massive shock, and that reverberated around the world. I think for a lot of people who didn't see that fight, they certainly heard about the result and the upset and the parallels with Mike Tyson and Buster Douglas 30 years ago. Definitely upset of the year by just a country mile. And moving on to the next category, fight of the year. And I'll also meld in here round of the year, because round of the year for me, round 3 of that fight, Joshua knocks down Ruiz. Ruiz gets up. Joshua thinks he's hurt and done, and then Ruiz catches him during an exchange, changed the fight. And that was an entertaining and dramatic fight, and that's why I give it fight of the year, because everything that went on in there, in the back and forth action with Joshua dropping him, but ultimately being dropped in the same round twice, and then surviving a few rounds, doing okay, but ultimately Andy Ruiz Jr. breaks him down, works him to the body, stops him in 7 rounds. That was, for upset of the year, fight of the year, round of the year, a pretty good contender for me, and that is my pick. And the next category, also semi-related, comeback of the year. Anthony Joshua, so very humiliated on June 1st, goes into training camp, changes his style, and executes a completely different game plan in the rematch. A game plan that a lot of fans said that he just couldn't do, that he didn't have a back foot game, that he wouldn't be able to stay on the move for 12 rounds, given he had had stamina issues in the past, and he wasn't a noted back foot fighter. But he certainly showed in those months after the loss on June 1st, he put in the work, he'd come on leaps and bounds, and he executed a game plan to a T to beat Andy Ruiz Jr. with a comfortable decision in the end, getting his belts back. Certainly comeback of the year for me. Prospect of the year, I'm going to give that one to Daniel Dubois. There's a number of sort of things that I factor into this, but also activity is a key part of it, because there were a number of top tier prospects like Filip Hrgović, also Tony Yoka, that only had 2 or 3 fights this year. They need to be more busy and active at this point. Daniel Dubois had 5 fights. He had some good highlight reel KOs and a couple of really good wins. One against Razvan Kajanlu, the other against Nathan Gorman. Gorman. That Gorman performance really sort of nails it for me. Dominated a fellow unbeaten prospect, a guy many considered at least a top 10 to top 15 prospect, and he made Gorman look bang average. So prospect of the year, Daniel Dubois. And he certainly is going places, and I'd expect to see him on various lists in the years to come. The never give up fighter of the year. For me, this is Shondell Winters, 39-year-old who took up boxing late. He former cruiserweight. He goes in and fights Alexander Teslenko, the unbeaten prospect who fights out of Canada, and he beats him. Not only does he beat him, he knocks him out. So this is a guy who was expected to be in there as cannon fodder against Teslenko, but ultimately stops him in, 5 rounds I think it was. He hurt him multiple times in that fight. And then a couple of months later, he goes to Poland and faces Sergey Waweko and beats him as well. This was a guy in Waweko who only had one loss on his... This was a guy in Waweko who only had one loss on his ledger. He was also expected to beat Winters. So this guy who took up boxing late, 39 years old, smaller heavyweight in terms of 6'2" and just barely over 200 pounds. But he comes to fight, he comes to bang, and he gave it his all. And he got a couple of good wins in 2019. So salute to you, Shondell Winters. Vanishing act of the year goes to Rostislav Klitschko, the prospect out of Russia who had been on a tear until 2018, 13 fights, 13 wins, 13 first round stoppages. But for whatever reason, since August 2018, he's gone dark, inactive in 2019, and a little bit vague and evasive on social media when pressed about, what's happening when he's returning to the ring. Wasn't in the ring in 2019, and yeah, who knows what's happening with his career, but he is an exciting fighter, but disappeared in 2019 completely. And the next category, Donut of the Year. This well and truly goes to Jarrell Big Pharmacy Miller, who went on a tear with performance-enhancing drugs and played himself out of millions of dollars and a title shot against Anthony Joshua. The same title shot that Joshua lost on June 1st to Andy Ruiz Jr. So that could have been Miller in that fight, pressing for a victory, pressing for his own piece of glory, but his own stupidity, taking multiple substances, of which he's never fully accounted for. The GW 1516, never a proper explanation about how that came to be in his body. The other substances, HGH and EPO, he's put down to some sort of medical procedure on an elbow, but I did check with some performance-enhancing drug experts about that and the validity of that, and they said that sounded flimsy as anything that they've ever heard, and they said they were highly doubtful that was credible to any extent. But whatever the reason, Miller took the substances, lied about it initially from the first failed test, put up, posts that he would be vindicated, and the failed test kept rolling on. And after the fight with Joshua losing to Ruiz, you can see here, this is him. This is what he was doing after the fight. Didn't say anything, just looked at the camera, shaking his head, etc. So yeah, you are a donut, Jarrell Miller. You played yourself on that one. And in terms of my heavyweight of the decade, because the 10s are now over, we're moving into the 2020s. Well, I have done a video on Patreon on that, so you can check that out if you go to my Patreon, patreon.com/boxing squared. There is a link in the description box if you want to go check that out, and you can subscribe from as little as $1 a month. That's $1 US for weekly content that delves into topical issues. But in terms of 2019, it's now in the books. It was a year where there were sporadic highlights in the heavyweight division, but we didn't often get enough competitive fights often enough. Sometimes there was the best part of 2 to 3 weeks between decent-ish type fights happening. So there would be lulls along the way. Something we hadn't seen so much in 2017 or 2018, but here's hoping that it does pick up in 2020, because at the moment in January it's pretty light if you're a heavyweight fan. So here's hoping that it does pick up. But that was my review/awards for 2019. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you in 2020 supporting the channel, and drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.